Godfrey Bloom, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Pleasure.
You don't have rolling blackouts where you are, I'm guessing.
Well, they're not rolling blackouts at the moment, no, but it's something that will come, quite obviously. We're burning wood chips at our conventional power stations from the other side of the world. We have a government captured by greeny lunatics. We have net zero. And generally speaking, we're just, we'll catch you up. Make no mistake, we'll catch you up with this totally cretinous approach to energy production.
Well, at least South Africa or Africa is winning in something for a change.
Well, yeah, I watched you win the World Cup rugby, so you do get your wins.
Oh yes, we forgot about that. But we don't talk about rugby because Murray's Australian, and we don't like the Wallabies. Godfrey Bloom. For those who don't know, what is your biography, your background?
Well, I've got two branches. The city fund manager. For many years, and one is a military background, a very modest military background as a serving officer, but I am a graduate in geopolitical military studies and military history, so I have sort of two arrows to my bow, or two bows to my arrow, I don't know which one, so I feel that I can speak reasonably authoritatively on both matters economic and both matters military, because of course they are merged, geopolitical. My thesis was actually on the economic implications of warfare. And so I wear two hats. As long as you don't ask me about pop music or computers, we'll get along fine.
Well, I guess the segue obviously then is, where do we begin on what's going on in Ukraine? I know that you have spoken a bit about it, so I'm trying to think of a good starting point.
Well, I wrote my first article on the Ukraine in 2016. I was a member of the European Parliament before Great Britain left the European Union. And one of the big debates then was, should the Ukraine join the European Union? And it was generally felt, even by the European Union, which is an unbelievably corrupt organization in its own right, fascinatingly, even they thought the Ukraine was too corrupt to join the European Union. That's a pretty amazing thing in its own right. But of course, we saw the coup in 2014, where the CIA engineered a regime change in favor of what is quite obviously Eisenhower warned us of, the United States military-industrial complex expansion. There should be no NATO. The Soviet Union collapsed, could have been unwound. There's no need for NATO at all. But of course, if you have a military economy like the Americans do, much in the same way as the Prussian economy was in the 1890s, you have to have a bogeyman. You have to have a bogeyman. If you're going to have $1 trillion a year, 11 aircraft carrier groups, 200,000 overseas military personnel, 800 overseas bases as the Americans do, you've got to find somebody who's a bogeyman. And they've tried all over the globe to find a bogeyman. And of course, they've come back to square one, which is Russia. And they want regime change in Russia and the destruction of the Russian Federation. And they were using the Ukraine as a cat's paw, a launching pad, if you will. And they're building up the Ukrainian military now for many years, arming it and training it. And they thought they could get away with it. But of course, they're getting a good smacking from the Russian army, which anybody with any serious military experience or knowledge could have told them would happen. So they're getting their just desserts at the moment.
Why, though? Why is Putin so hated by the West?
Well, the trouble is that we have a system here. First of all, in Great Britain, Russia Today is not allowed to broadcast. They've closed Russia Today down. So none of the speeches that Putin made asking for negotiated peace a year ago and some common sense being brought to bear has been exposed to the British public. So they don't know any of this. All they're doing is getting the Washington near view and the CIA view. And whatever Washington says is then immediately broadcast on British television and radio and in the press. So they're only getting one view. And this is the problem. Only one view. Propaganda, as Goebbels said, what you must do in propaganda, it's a very interesting biography if you get to read Goebbels, you must have one simple message which must appeal to the emotions. Not fact, that doesn't work. It must appeal to emotion, and dissent is not allowed. There must be no dissent. So nobody at all, from the beginning of this conflict, has been allowed to give the Russian point of view. So consequently, what we would call here the man on the Clapham omnibus, and in America, perhaps Joe Sixpack, he believes, they all believe, and I'm talking about quite intelligently, in other fields, that one day Putin woke up with a sore head, he'd been drinking too much or something, he was bored stiff and invaded the Ukraine. 90% of the people in Great Britain believe that to be the case. And then he's an evil man and he's an ogre and all the rest of it, and we must remove him militarily. I mean, of course, the average man on the Clapham omnibus these days, it's not like 100 years ago, has no military experience whatsoever. And I think Colonel McGregor made the point, a very good point, in his last little clip that he was being interviewed by. And that was, we have lost our fear of war. We have lost our fear of war. This is very dangerous. And of course, we've seen people walking around with masks, quadruply jabbed with a drug, because they're terrified. They seem to be totally relaxed about nuclear war. They're not bothered about nuclear war. Presumably, they think if they get a mask and get a jab, they will avoid the consequence of a nuclear war. And I have never really understood this, but, do you know, funnily enough, Jeremy, I've started a Smithsonian Institute long-distance learning program on psychology because my wife and I and my like-minded friends simply cannot understand how people come to the decisions which they come to. There must be some kind of psychological glitch in their thought process or their risk assessment that means that we've got ourselves into this situation where people are being led by the nose by people who we know to be crooks. We know they're crooked. We know they're scoundrels, but still it goes on. Fascinating.
Why do you think? I mean, I've wondered this now for the last few years also. How is it that you and I can have this conversation, but others can't? What do you think is going on in them? Is it propaganda? Is it mental illness? What do you think is going on?
Well, certainly propaganda is primary in this. We saw Great Britain's entry into the Great War in 1914, which was driven almost certainly by the press. The Liberal government of the day didn't want to go to war under Asquith. It was a Liberal Party administration. They didn't really want to go to war with Germany. They knew that it would be suicidal, whether we won or lost. And Lord Grey made that point. We see the lights going out in Europe and we will not see them lit again in our lifetime. We knew this to be the case. But everybody was scrambling for war in Paris, Berlin, and London. And it was war that they seemed to want because they didn't understand what a modern war was. A modern war with modern ordnance in the field. They didn't understand what that meant. And of course, by 1918, we'd had somewhere in the region of 3 million British Empire killed. Lord only knows how many Russians, Germans, Austrians, and French. So people are driven by emotion. They are gullible. In some instances, they are stupid. They are intellectually lazy. And the result is what we see now with people coming to these crazy conclusions. I have, just to get that, Jeremy, I have a small holding in Yorkshire, just a few horses and a few chickens and stuff, not very much. And it's a very small community overall. It's a very small parish, only of a few hundred people. I know I have 11 acquaintances, friends, acquaintances and neighbors, 11 out of this small community who have myocarditis post-jab, for example. They will not join the dots. They just think it is an extraordinary coincidence. But of course,
climate change.
Mark Twain said, didn't he? It's much easier to fool people than it is to persuade them that they have been fooled.
Yes, and they make excuses like, well, it's climate change, or it's gardening, it's fitness, it's, I don't know, it's the water they drank or something. It's never, ever the elephant in the room. It's never.
No, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I wish that's why I'm doing the course, the Smithsonian course on psychology. I'm trying to see if I can get to the bottom of it. Perhaps they're all barking mad. Or perhaps, Jeremy, we're mad. I don't know. Somebody's mad in the loop.
I wonder if you're going to get to a conclusion ever.
I don't think I am.
All right, Godfrey, before I go to my next question, let me just quickly do an ad break. I'll be back with you shortly. Godfrey, it's remarkable how interconnected so many of these big vectors are. We were talking about Ukraine a moment ago, and there's a byproduct of that, energy. We often see the same word come up with regards to gas and the gas pipe, the pipelines, et cetera. And of course, then the elephant in that room is climate change. It's the biggest agenda coming out of the UN and the World Economic Forum. I am absolutely 100% convinced it has nothing to do with climate. Do you agree?
Oh yes, I mean the hypothesis that atmospheric carbon dioxide is going to cause apocalyptic weather change is ludicrous. I mean, it's laughably ludicrous. It's stunning how anybody could even begin to believe it. If you look at the situation, and I know you will have had guests on your show and you would have said it yourself before, that if the atmospheric carbon dioxide is 0.03% of the atmosphere, that's what it's made. And man-made carbon dioxide is somewhere in the region of a few percentage points of that, and an individual country such as Great Britain is something like 0.1% of that, or 1% of that figure. So it's negligible. Even if you accepted the hypothesis that the increase in carbon dioxide was going to cause apocalyptic global warming, it's still net zero still wouldn't make any sense for the Western industrial democracies. Then, of course, if you look at correlation, let's say, for example, I was on the Environment Committee in the European Union for 3 years, and I had a lot of researchers. There were a lot of researchers in Brussels. In all, somewhere in the region of probably 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 researchers just paid to research for parliamentary members. And I put out a Charlie call for a prize. And I said, I will give a case of very good champagne to any researcher who can show me a correlation between atmospheric carbon dioxide and weather. Nobody won the prize. Nobody could explain the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period, the mini ice age. Nobody could understand it, and there was no correlation between atmospheric carbon dioxide. Then there isn't now, and there hasn't been since the beginning of time. Of course, again, if you espouse that point of view, you will simply not get on the television. So all the climate scientists who don't believe in this crazy hypothesis, who've written books, I've got mountains of books in my office, who've written books saying, this is absurd, there is no climate crisis. Well, they can't get on TV. So who do we put on TV? People, celebrities like Harrison Ford or Emma Thompson, people with little tiny weeny brains, but talk a good story. We have a doom goblin from Sweden. We have a slightly backward Swedish teenager pushing out top scientists to tell us that there is no crisis. So yet again, the man on the Clapham Omnibus, or Joe Sixpack, believes it all must be true, or surely somebody would stand up and say that it isn't. But you can't get on. You simply can't get on. The science correspondent in the BBC, David Bellamy, Dr. David Bellamy, some years ago, said it's all a lot of nonsense. They sacked him and brought in a chap called Roger Harabin, who was a climate activist, not a scientist. So they have to push all this. So we know it's nonsense, but here's what they can do. They can then enlist the WHO, the IMF, the WEF, everybody else can come together and have a system of political control for our own benefit. They would not get away with this in any other way. Then, at least in the Middle Ages, if the king came and stole your money and stole your wife and stole your house, he would do it in an honest way. He was an honest thief. And everybody knew he was done, and he did it because he could do it. Now, stolen, we have our travel restricted and so on and so forth for our own benefit. And they tell us it's for our own good. And that clip you just played earlier of Kerry, who flies everywhere in a private jet and talks a good story about climate change. But then let's be brutally frank, Jeremy, his hair is fake. I mean, have a look at the picture. Don't believe that hair. Look, I know I'm bald, all right? But don't believe that hair. His hair is fake. Everything about the guy is fake, but he goes on getting away with it.
Carbon dioxide is foundational to life on Earth. If they want to reduce carbon dioxide, I can only imagine that this is a depopulation agenda because it makes no other sense.
We live close to Drax. Drax is a big conventional power station which actually gives energy for a very big, large slab of the north of England. They got rid of coal. It was a very clean conventional. All the nasty gases were taken out. Your sulfur and carbon monoxide and both. It was burning very clean. But the government came along and offered a huge subsidy of billions if they burnt wood. So they wood chips from the other side of the world, which are brought on boats, which are fueled by diesel, trains, brand new trains, incidentally, specific to roll, which are brought in, subsidized. Drax still has a £2 million a day subsidy from the taxpayer. And if you go down the river a little bit, 20 miles down the river, there's a big growing area under glass, tomatoes and cucumbers and that kind of thing, and very, very significant in the north of England, farming of these products. They have little machines that actually push carbon dioxide into the glass houses to help them grow. At Drax, they've made huge pipes to take out the carbon dioxide that they create and bury it under the ground, which costs billions of pounds. You couldn't invent this. Now nobody can afford, if you get your electricity, you're having blackouts down there, nobody can afford electricity now here. They're giving everybody, every household, £60 a month to help them with their bills. Where does the £60 come from? It comes from the poor people who can't afford their bill, doesn't it? There's nowhere else it can come from, is there? So we have this is all crazy. Now, it could change. There is maybe a bright side, in my view. There could be a bright side. And that is, it's bloody cold here, I can tell you, in Yorkshire at the moment. I rather believe that when people have had a winter of this and they start getting their bills in months to come and at the end of the year and next winter, they might suddenly wake up and go, just a minute, we've been listening to climate change for 30 years. When's it going to happen? It hasn't happened. And in the 1970s, old geezers like me, I'm an old man now, I remember the 1970s, it was a new ice age that was coming. It was a new ice age we were going to have. I
saw that.
Dear, oh dear.
It's, again, as you pointed out earlier, something going on in the psyche of people. And whether it's wearing a mask or thinking that turning on a light bulb is going to cause the Arctic to melt, it's Monty Pythonesque. That's what it is. you might as well include it into a John Cleese sketch.
Yes, you could quite easily, really, couldn't you? It's interesting that Galileo and Nicholas Copernicus had the same problem with the Catholic Church in Europe. When he suggested that the Earth went round the sun, that was absolutely terrible. And it was nearly 100 years before you were allowed to actually say that, if you weren't done over by the Spanish Inquisition. Nothing is out without an historical precedent. Nothing is without a historical precedent. It might be mutated in some form, but we've sort of been here before. What we haven't seen is it on a global scale. We've seen it on regional scales, this kind of nonsense, in Europe, in America, and so on and so forth. But what we haven't seen is on the sort of scale that's on now. The biggest disaster in humankind since the beginning of time was the Great War, which was followed by part two of the Great War, which was 1939-45, with people rushing back. That went on for years, with people, casualties on the Western Front, 5,000 men a day, 5,000 men a day. South Africa's included, Aussies included, and it went on for years. And if you check Hansard, this might be interesting, if you check Hansard, the transcription of debate in the House of Commons, you'll find almost no debate in the Great War about the prosecution of the war. Now, that's an interesting thing. And 100 years on, we have no serious political debate about vaccine injury or the war in the Ukraine. It's Hansard, we're worried about all sorts of other things which don't matter. Things that could trigger nuclear war or actually genocide with people getting spike protein into their systems are not really seriously debated. Only one man raised it, a man called Andrew Bridgen, MP, Tory MP. They immediately threw him out of the party. And his speech in the House of Commons was strictly factual. He was just reading out the data from impeccable sources. And they slung him out for anti-Semitism. I mean, you couldn't invent all this sort of thing, because he quoted a Jewish, he quoted an Israeli virologist who agreed with him. That made him anti-Semitic. Don't ask me, I don't know, but he's out now. One out of 625 odd MPs, the only man prepared to stand up and tell the truth was immediately chucked out. We live in very, very strange, dark times.
Godfrey, on a scale of 0 to neo-Marxism, how quickly is the West imploding?
Frighteningly quickly, and of course it's an own goal. We were always going to be under pressure from the East, where they do not have the military budgets and the welfare budgets that we have here. They don't have green politics. They pay lip service to green politics, but they don't really go with it. I worked in Hong Kong for a while. I know a little bit how they think and how it all works. Now, because the Americans have weaponized the dollar, an act of unbelievable stupidity, of course, the pushback is, well, don't let's deal with the dollar. Don't let's have the dollar. And so you now have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes BRICS. So you're talking a lot about South America. You're talking about Africa, you're talking about China, you're talking about Russia and the stans. What is actually happening now is that people in the East and the Indian subcontinent have got so fed up with the bully boys in Washington that they've just detached. And if you look at the growth in GNP, which is not a measure actually is particularly effective, but I'll use it because people do, the growth is in the East. And of course, we are we have inflation in the West, which is caused by money printing, the Fed, all this sort of stupidity has brought it upon ourselves. We've confiscated billions of dollars which are owned by the Russians. The British have done likewise, the City of London, and we're misappropriating gold reserves which have been given to us by other countries, Venezuela in particular. Now, what the problem is the City of London has broken faith. If you can confiscate money in Great Britain without due process of law, which has happened. If you can do that in America, nobody is going to leave their money in North America or Great Britain. So consequently, you're cutting off one of your great sources of wealth, which is financial services. That's going down. We will find that we can't keep up with manufacturing because we're paying too much for our electricity. And all these things that we've done to ourselves. And of course, we put up wind turbines in the North Sea, which don't work, which are quite ludicrous and don't last as long as anybody said. Where are they made? Well, they're made in China. Solar panels are made in China. They then send them in, which they make with coal-fired power stations, so they can do it cheaply, and they can mine silver and all things that need, and plastic. We put them on the boat, and they send them over here, and we think it's terribly green, and absolutely wonder, we're going to save the planet. Fascinating, but actually, who gets the money out of these wind turbines, for example? Who's the biggest winner from wind turbines? King Charles III, sometimes known here in Yorkshire as Charles the Mad. He's making billions because it's Crown property offshore. 3 or 4 miles offshore is Crown property, which is where the wind turbines are. So he's waxing really good on that. He's getting loads of money out of that. And every now and again, he makes a very big contribution to charity to make him feel good and cut the mustard with most of us. And then, of course, you've got other things. Who's got the land for them? Landowners. Who are the biggest landowners in the country who are getting millions and millions of pounds a year for putting these things on their land? Well, of course, they're all related to politicians, senior politicians, and the great and the good. So that's going on. Where does the profit come from wind turbines, which is done with government subsidy? They're all offshore funds. They're all offshore funds in trust. So the money, taxpayers' money. So you've actually got Sir Reginald Sheffield down the road to me, a neighbour of mine, incidentally, a very nice bloke. Nothing wrong with him, Reggie. He's a good bloke. He's a big landowner. He makes 5 million a year out of wind turbines. But of course, then if you go down up the river to Pontefract, little old ladies on old age pensions who could barely get by on 200 quid a week are actually paying subsidised electricity. So Sir Reginald Sheffield can make millions of pounds a year. Yeah, this is the biggest wealth transfer that we have seen in Europe and probably North America since the Middle Ages. It's absolutely fascinating. I watch amazed with the whole thing. I'm all right. I have a small holding. We can grow our own food, and I'm sensible enough that I have my money secreted in gold. So I really, frankly, at my age, don't give a shit. But I think it's a great shame.
You mentioned gold. Now, I have done a few shows recently on gold, and I live in a country where we mine gold, so it's obviously quite close to home. You're a big fan of gold, and you've said that it's not an investment. Why do you say that?
Well, I've always taken, and I'm not new to gold. I've been a gold bug for sort of 25 years, and before that in the city, 40 years, I was managing quite successfully fixed in not fashionable fixed interest, bit boring, but so really I'm a number cruncher by trade, and I look at trends and I look at numbers. Now, there's one thing that as we see the degradation of money, for example, gold isn't going up in value. People make the mistake that gold is going up in value. It's not. Fiat currency, paper currency is being degraded against gold. So if I'm lecturing at a university, I always take a gold sovereign. I take a gold sovereign, and the one I happen to have, and there's no reason for it, it happens to be dated 1905. That doesn't matter. So the gold sovereign is 1905. And I show the undergraduates that would buy you bed and breakfast in a good hotel in Berlin, Paris, New York, or London in 1905. It will do the same today. It will do the same today because it's now £400 or just under £400. It will buy you bed and breakfast in a good hotel in any of those cities. So I'm not sure about New York these days, it's gotten very expensive, but roughly speaking. So it's a preservation of wealth. And in 100 years' time, that gold sovereign will buy you bed and breakfast in a good hotel in Paris or London or New York if the idiot neocons haven't blown all those cities up. So gold is a reserve. Gold is a reserve for you and your family. And it's gold you should have. You need paper money to pay your bills, pay the milkman, pay this, pay that. You need a small amount of that. But if you want to protect you and your family in the medium to long term, down there where you live, be holding Kroger rands, of course. I hold sovereigns. But it doesn't really matter because it's bullion value anyway. The advantage happens to be in England that there's no VAT and no capital gains tax because it's coin of the realm. It's got a little picture of the Queen's hat, and the new ones have got Charles the Mad on them as well. So they are coin of the realm. So it's the way to go. Investment, you can speculate to beat inflation and make money. That isn't the role of gold. That isn't the role of gold. Gold isn't get rich quick. Gold is to protect you from the shit that's coming down the road to you at the moment.
Sorry, I have to take a side moment here and ask you, what are your views on the royal family as they are right now?
Well, now, funnily enough, I'm a great monarchist. I'm a holder of the Queen's Commission, the late Queen. I'm a holder of the Commission. I was a guest of hers at Buckingham Palace, a relatively small soiree a few years ago, and I can tell you her hospitality was second to none. She will actually, you could float a battleship on the amount of champagne that she hands out, and the nibbles were really demon, and it was great, and I am a monarchist. However, we have a problem in this dichotomy that we have. Does she have a constitutional role? Most politicians and people in England and Britain thinks that she doesn't have a serious constitutional role. She does. It's extremely serious. And her coronation oath was based on the 1688 Bill of Rights and the Toleration Acts and so on and so forth. That is her role. And it was illegal, for example, for her to sign the accession to membership of the European Union. Quite illegal. And all you need to do is Google up the coronation oath and read it. She is not allowed to sign the subcontraction of our government to anyone else. And that was based to keep the Pope out, keep the Catholics out. That was the reason. That's the reason it's in the coronation oath, to keep the Catholics at bay. And the reason, but it's still illegal for the monarch to agree, or anti-constitutional. She had a constitutional role, which she failed in, I'm afraid to say. It grieves me to say it. And we've got this new king, Mad King Charles, who believes all the climate nonsense. He advocates all the climate nonsense. He didn't do anything which is against our constitution as well. He seems to take more notice of big international oligarchs and celebrities than he does of his own people. And he's shown that as the Prince of Wales, and he will show that, I'm quite sure, as king. He's totally and utterly Princess Diana said that, if you remember, if you dig right back to the time, she said he's completely unsuited to be king, and I believe indeed he is. But we will see. And I wrote an article on my website for a magazine, which is posted on my website. Will the monarchy survive the Windsors? The problem is that the Windsors are dysfunctional as a family. There's nothing wrong with a constitutional monarchy. We've just got the wrong family. I don't know whether we go back to the Tudors or the Plantagenets. I don't quite know how we work it, but nothing wrong with monarchy, just the monarch.
I'm a fan of monarchy as well, and of the monarchy, shall I say. Okay, Godfrey with an F. Oh, my words are stumbling. I quickly have to do my last ad break. I'll be back with you shortly. Okay, let me get this right. Godfrey Bloom. My apologies. My lips were getting the better of me. As we're coming to the last lap of this conversation, where do you see things heading?
Gosh, that's so difficult. It depends what day you ask me whether I'm feeling optimistic or not. I think that things will have to get a lot worse before they get better. And I think if they get worse, we might lose the apathy in the Western democracies. For example, we have a complete and utter lunatic as the mayor of London. Totally and utterly barking mad. Comes from the other side of the world. I don't know which part of the world he's from, but he's certainly not from central London. But we have this fellow who got elected for the second time. All right, he got elected for the second time. Now, how did he get elected for the second time? Because 70% of the voters in London didn't turn out to vote. Everybody complains about the way he runs London, but they don't actually bother to vote for anybody else. And there were some quite good candidates standing, reasonably good candidates, sensible candidates, but they just didn't turn out to vote for him. So we've got to get rid of the apathy of people who, when things get worse, they might actually decide that they can do something about it through the ballot box. If it's not a crooked ballot box like your last news clip, which seemed to be turning North America into a banana republic. But then again, you've got to look at Australia. I have to say Australia, with an electorate that re-elected Andrews, for example. What was going on in their head when they went into the ballot box to re-elect that man? What happens when they were watching on TV policemen duffing up old ladies and women? That clip that we saw up here in England, a woman not wearing a mask and was brutalized by these fellas. I'm an old man now, but I used to do a little bit in the ring, and I can tell you, if I'd been walking by when that happened, I'd have weighed in. That bloke needed a bloody good lesson. You don't treat women like that. And in Australia, which we all, generally speaking, view as one of the top countries in which to live, one of the lucky countries, what's going on with Australians? They voted the guy in again. What the hell's going on? And until we all wake up, and I mean the electorate, things aren't going to get better, but they can get better. But I don't know whether they can do it under the sort of democratic system we have. And of course, the democratic system that we have now is nothing to do with the original Greek concept of democracy. Yes. A lovely American expression is skin in the game. Everybody gets a vote if they're 18 years old. That is not democracy. That's not the way it was designed to be. You have to have skin in the game. If you, for a few pints in Cape Town or Adelaide, it doesn't matter where it is, or London, if you go out with your mates and you put 50 quid into the kitty, if you don't put in your 50 quid, you don't get a beer. It's not difficult, and yet everybody gets a vote regardless of whether they contribute or not to society. You can't run a democracy like that. It's not a real democracy. It's fake. And this is why this keeps on going on. How did Biden get in? Because the whole thing's crooked. It was crooked. So we're going to have to deal. There's a lot we need to deal with.
Yes, I agree with you, and in fact, very much so. Which is why I said earlier I'm a fan of monarchy, because under the current zeitgeist, a monarchy is far superior. And I think Hans Hermann Hoppe made this point in a book of his, in which which is called "Democracy: The God That Failed," and he stated that the current system where anybody can vote is absolutely insane. Imagine if you operated a company like that. Imagine if Apple every 5 years told all their staff to vote who their new CEO should be.
Yeah. They'd all vote for free machines, wouldn't they? And it's like Marks and Spencer up here. It's ridiculous. If you gave everybody the vote who was a customer and not a shareholder, everybody would vote for cheaper trousers and cheaper suits, or cheaper whatever it was, wouldn't they? You cannot do that. So in places like Sheffield, towns like Sheffield, where everybody gets to vote over 18. If you live in Sheffield, you don't have to be born in Sheffield, or you don't have to be born in the country. You get a vote. And the Labour Party popped up about 10 or 15 years ago and said, "Would you like a council-run Olympic-sized swimming pool?" And everyone said, "Yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it?" But only about 1 person in 8 actually pays rates for it, or property tax, as you probably call it down there. So yeah, I mean, you're going to vote. I would love. Free this, free golf courses, free that, because they're not free. And the first thing we ought to do, is start a campaign, is to ban the word free. There is no such thing as free, all right? taxpayer funded. I was walking through the town this morning and it was get your flu jab, free flu jab. No, get your taxpayer funded flu jab is what it should have said.
Do you think there's something to the phrase madness of crowds?
Yes, there is. And I read Hopper's book. He's quite right, because the argument with the monarch, of course, is that you have one guy who's got the stewardship of the country. He wants the country to be successful. Therefore, he will always make decisions in the medium or long term which are favorable to the country, even if he steals your gold plate or rapes your wife or whatever it happens to be. That in the long term, that's the way he's going to go. But you see, that doesn't always follow, does it? We have Mad King Charles, who has no interest in his people at all. He's head of the church. He's head of the Church of England. But we've got an absolutely ridiculous, absurd Archbishop of Canterbury. He hasn't sacked him. The previous one was a ludicrous idiot as well. He's supposed to be, the buck stops with the king in the Church of England, but he doesn't do anything about it. He must know that net zero is going to crucify the economy of this country, but he doesn't do anything about it. And there's still things as a monarch, as a constitutional monarch, he could do. He could say behind the scenes to the Prime Minister, when the Prime Minister goes up there on duty, say, I will not give a cent. I will not give a cent to any bills which promote net zero. And if you put me on the rack, I'll go on television and I will abdicate, because that final responsibility constitutionally lies with me. And he should do that. Can you imagine him doing that? I can't.
Godfrey, other than doing what you're doing, which I think is fantastic, where you attempt to grow your own food and you try and get off the grid and you become as self-sufficient as possible, which I think is a great way to fight all this global nonsense, or globalist nonsense, should I say. What else do you think the normal Joe Soap can do to push back against all this crap?
Well, the first thing he must become politically active. He must stop dog turds with blue rosettes on or red vote rosettes on. And it's the same in America, voting blue or red. The party system is absolutely dire. It's fatal. People vote for the least worst idiot, and that's got to stop. So they can take that into their own thing. Don't vote. I haven't voted for years for the simple reason, when I look at these muppets, these sleaze bags, I at least can put my hand on my heart and said, I didn't vote for them. Did you vote for them? And I was at a dinner party the other day. I occasionally get invited. I don't get invited very much. I'm a bit outspoken, you might have noticed. And I said, everybody around this dinner table voted Conservative. They went, oh, yeah, but if we didn't, we'd... Yeah, because you're all morons. You've done nothing all dinner party about moan about tax and the state of the country. You put them there. I didn't put them there. You put them there. And that's got to stop. And in the war, back to the last war, back to the last war, everybody was digging out their garden and growing a few potatoes, a few sprouts, or they had allotments where you could grow some of your own food. That is something that could be useful. Put your life savings in gold, and that is a few steps that you can take. But I would say, perhaps, when people say, what can I do practically now? What can I do immediately? Don't pay the BBC. If you don't pay the BBC £150 a year, which nobody watches and up here, and everybody loathes because it's disgusting and cheating and lying and rotten, just don't pay. If everybody didn't pay the BBC, the BBC would disappear. That's something you can do. It's the very first thing you can do. And then if you have to go on looking at all this nonsense that the councils bring out with their sort of LBGTPD, QED bollocks that goes on, don't pay them. Stop it, check, muck them about. Only wait until the last minute when the bailiff comes and then pay them. And they might learn that their job is actually to provide clean roads and some schools and some policemen who actually do what you want, not beat up old ladies, because ours are no better, incidentally. Yeah, we've got to start getting a bit active. But nobody goes to the barricades, Jeremy, with a full belly, do they? That's the trouble. Nobody really sticks ahead. If they've got a car in the garage, a full tummy, and they're going to Spain again next year for a holiday, they're not ready yet for revolution. But the day will come. Oh, it will come, and it's come to this country before. We had a civil war.
Godfrey. We are very quickly running out of time, so I'm not going to give you more than 30 seconds. Quickly, where can I follow your work?
Everything's on my website. Absolutely everything. Godfrey Bloom, smallcase.uk. Very easy. GodfreyBloom.uk. And if you contact me, I will respond in the fullest of time.
Oh, wow. You actually kept that within 30 seconds. Everybody struggles with that. Listen, Godfrey, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. You are a breath of fresh air. I really hope I can get you back. My audience, I can see in the live chat, are loving you. I think what you're saying resonates. So God bless you for that.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me on. And maybe we'll have a chat at Easter when the Russian army is actually in Kiev.
Oh, that's a good idea. All right, I will make a note of that. So thank you, Godfrey Bloom, for joining me in the trenches. It's been a pleasure as always.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.